So, welcome to Pennsylvania Patriot Radio, everyone. This is Robert Knorr. I'm here with Carlos Saldivia and Todd Bartley today. We got a great show lineup. We have a guest. So, go ahead, Carlos. You want to take it from here?
Good morning, America. How are you? Today we're joined by Rob Knorr and Todd Bartley and our guest, let's be frank, who is one of my absolute favorite online personalities, and we're thrilled to have him. But before we go to our guests and our hosts, I wanted to let you know that we started the show because we wanted to give a setting where people could come and learn how to stand on their own 2 feet and defend the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and all thought that goes through that lens. And that is the name of the show. It's called Pushback, hosted by Pennsylvania Patriots Radio. And I have to thank, actually, my friend Todd Bartley. But I wanted to talk to you today. I had a different opening this morning, mostly because of our guest today. But I went to sleep last night, and then I woke up this morning and I had the same thought, and I just couldn't get it out of my head. So here it is. Why prostrate yourself to be a slave, to make up for the past of someone's forefathers being a slave? What kind of person does that? What kind of person accepts that? Where do we go after you do that? How are we all created equal based on that idea and those actions? You want to make things equal? Take away welfare. Take away affirmative action. Take away the safety net. Congratulations. Now you're equal. Welcome to the NFL. I mean, you don't have to cowboy up, but you do have to grow up. That being said, I'd like to start with Todd this morning. Good morning, Todd.
Good morning, gentlemen.
What guarantee or certainty do we have that all economic shutdowns in the United States were necessary to stop the virus?
The certainty that we have is they were absolutely unnecessary from all of the data and the science that's been provided to date. I can't find any of the data that says that we need to shut down the economy. Pennsylvania is one of the states leading the country in unemployment and then jobs lost. I mean, it's going to take years, if ever, we get back to where we were pre-pandemic.
Rob, before we go to Frank, what's the point of having a Republican Party?
It's a great question. It's almost to the point where you hope that they lose, even though the Democrats are worse, just so we could get some people that actually defend this country and love this country. We continue to vote for people over and over and over again. And when the chips are down, when it's things like the lockdown, when it's things like the riots that are consuming this country, they decide to do nothing at all. And we have to ask ourselves, can we rely on this party anymore? I don't think we can. I think that any change we see that's positive is going to have to come from the ground up and from individuals that are tired of seeing their country and the history of it being destroyed.
Pretty sad state of affairs. Why don't you, Robert, introduce our guest, and I will lead off the questioning.
Sure. So my guest today, or our guest, I guess one of my two person, is my friend Let's Be Frank, who has a YouTube channel called Let's Be Frank. I met him through a grouping that we did, the Patriot panel that we used to do, and he's one of my favorite people. That's an independent content creator, someone who's very concerned with where our country's going, with the state of conservativeness being kind of shunned. And so we thought he'd be a great person to come on, talk about his history and his background and where he sees the country going. So thank you so much for being here, Frank. I think you're muted real quick. There you go.
Yeah, no, Thank you for having me, and thank you for allowing me to come onto y'all's platform here to be able to share ideas and exchange some ideas. So thank you for the invitation.
So, Frank, Carlos Saldivia here from Williamsport, Pennsylvania. You and I share some things, and I wanted to see, before we started talking to you and asking you questions, can you just give us like a minute and a half biography of your American experience growing up here and how you ended up in media?
Yeah, sure. I would love to. Well, I'm a third generation Mexican American here in the United States. I was born in the city of Tampa, Florida, where my parents were migrant workers. So I grew up in a migrant worker household where we would migrate up and down the coast from Florida all the way up as far as north as Western New York, harvesting different crops such as tomatoes and oranges and things like that. And the first thing I learned growing up in this country is that with hard work and dedication, that you can absolutely achieve whatever goal you set out beside you. You know, many people talk about disadvantages and privilege in the country that we currently are growing up in, or that we're living in, with a lot of these younger people saying that, you know, they are at a disadvantage. Well, let me tell you, nothing about disadvantage is growing up as a migrant worker, being out in the hot fields as young as 5 years old, out there working alongside adults and trying to help provide for your family. The one privilege I will say I did have was growing up in a two-parent household, and which I think helped establish so many great norms for my brothers and myself growing up. And, you know, all three of us have experienced success on different levels, and being able to achieve those goals that we've put aside. You know, I had a very successful career in retail sales for 25 years before I retired. And now I have stepped into the arena of sharing ideas in social media, mostly on YouTube, and commenting on the things that I see that's currently happening in our media and in politics. And it just goes against the actual American spirit, even that you find in everyday towns across this great country of ours, where people are hardworking Americans and they love their country and they don't want to see history erased. Even though history may be hurtful, it's important to keep that history around to remind us not to follow in the same footsteps. And I find it very, very peculiar that we are following some of this very same footsteps that we said we would never follow. So just a quick brief history of who I am. Thanks.
There were three of you growing up?
Yes.
Okay. Where were you in that order?
I am the oldest.
Okay. So I share the fact that I come from an immigrant experience. I was born in Caracas, Venezuela. I came here at a very, very young age, and I grew up in northern New Jersey in a very white, wealthy, conservative Republican community. I was basically the only ethnic kid in like 7 towns around us. So I know that experience. Okay, not that you guys don't know what injustice is, but I know that experience, pretty good. I like to joke around with my friends and tell them that I have the Guinness Book of World Records of being in more fistfights than anybody under 11 years old, not even close. And I also have the world record of getting into a fistfight with the most number of people that can get into a fight. Okay, so that being said, one of the things that I think I share with you is that based on the America that you and I know from our perspective, not that we know everything, but from our perspective, nothing stood in our way, correct?
No, you're absolutely correct. I know the one thing that my parents did instill in me was to never allow anything to be an excuse for not succeeding. And they told me the reason they brought me out to the fields, not that they had to, was because they wanted me to learn that this is not the position you want to be in. This is not the position you want to grow up in. You want to be able to achieve more. And just like you mentioned, growing up in a predominantly white neighborhood, being a migrant, most times we were in school. My parents always made sure I was put in a school wherever we were at. And many times in those schools, I was one of the only minorities in the school. I shared this experience with Rob the other evening on his program, where, for example, in Western New York, I was one of 3 individuals in that school that were minority. Me, my brother, and this Black American female. And we were the only ones in that high school. But I told Rob, I said, it was almost like being a celebrity at that point, because you were different. People wanted to know about you, know more about your background and stuff like that. So I never came across as being underprivileged. That thought never crossed my mind growing up.
So did you find that wherever you went, and my experience in growing up was basically northern New Jersey and Pennsylvania and New York City. Did you find that there was a systemic bias against you? I mean, like, it when you see it, right, Frank?
Yeah, of course. And through my experiences growing up, I never saw that as an issue. I never saw that something that there was this invisible thing, as you mentioned, systemic racism holding me back. And even if it was there, I wasn't going to allow it to hold me back. There wasn't anything that was going to tell me, no, you can't achieve that. Well, that was going to make me work even harder to try to achieve those goals.
Nothing was going to stand in your way. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Todd?
First of all, Frank, thanks for taking the time. And what you mentioned moments ago takes me back to my time in Eastern North Carolina, specifically Lenoir County, which is around Kinston, Jones County around Trenton, and then down into Onslow County, where Camp Lejeune is, in Jacksonville, North Carolina. And there's a ton of migrant labor. I want to cover 2 things with you briefly. Can you take me back to the family unit that you talked about when you guys were staying in Florida and working in the fields? Were you staying there at the fields in housing facilities there, or did you live off-site and kind of commute in? How did that work? And then I want to cover the point that you just covered a little bit ago about being a rock star as well.
Yeah, absolutely. In Florida, we actually had a house in the state of Florida. So where we lived was near Tampa there, and we had a house. So we would travel in to wherever we were needed, whatever field we were harvesting. Other times, though, when we were traveling to states such as South Carolina or even Western New York, we would also stay off-site, but we would rent a house or rent an apartment or something like that. My parents didn't want me and my brothers to be growing up in the camps, as you would call those. The camps, if your viewers might not know what those are, they're typically housing units provided by the farmer on the fields there, where people can stay, and they're pretty low income, very, very low income. Some of them are very, very in poor shape. So my parents didn't want me to grow up in those our family to grow up in that. So they did sacrifice and make sure we were able to grow up in in some type of a housing unit that was outside of the farm there. And as far as being a rock star, as you mentioned, yeah, I really found that more so when we would visit Western New York. We were there in the Dunker, Fredonia area, Western New York. There, we would the community there was predominantly white, and it was myself, my brothers, and just one other young lady there that went there. But they found us very interesting because for one, we traveled a lot. We went from South Carolina to Florida, and we would stop in a lot of different individual places, and that helped me socially as well to learn how to make friends. Is that as well? But that aura of almost kind of mystery really intrigued a lot of classmates of mine into Western New York. When I was in Florida going to school, we had plenty of Mexicans. I had family that was there, so I really didn't stick out much when I was back home in Florida. But whenever I was out in South Carolina or even Western New York, it was always a different feeling.
Well,
Frank, have we kind of, give me 1 second, Carlos. Frank, have we kind of stumbled across the key to really ending this whole narrative of the systemic racism? Because what you brought up a moment ago, Frank, is your life experience, your family's life experience, what you're about, who you are as a person, intrigued your classmates. Is the probity and the questions and just getting to know each other really the key to this whole thing of listening to each other as opposed to talking at each other? Is that really the key?
I would say yes. That is definitely the key. Just an opportunity if you're put into a setting where you just want to learn about each other. Political bias is something that I think we start gaining once we become adults, where we start seeing the world more politically, and it's gotten worse over the last couple of decades. When I was a teenager or even in middle school, we didn't talk politics. We talked about TV shows. We talked about football. We talked about sports and comics, and real quick, people find out we have a lot in common. Many times my house at the apartment where we lived at in Western New York, my house became the center for kids to come and play video games because, I would have a couple video games and they would come over. We all play. As you guys know, we didn't have internet back in the 90s to play online. So people would come over, we play, and everybody would have a great time. And there was no hatred toward each other because we just became friends because we had those common things that we were all drawn to.
Well, I will tell you two things. Number one, Robert, you see, mysterious Latinos are just a lot more attractive than regular white guys from Clarion County.
I agree.
And number two, sports saved my life. The reason why I love the city of Williamsport is because their forefathers, when I came here to Little League World Series camp back in 1970 and 71, were the very first people outside my immediate family that called me something other than coffee bean or Chiquita banana or sugar baron. You know what they called me? Ball player. You know how much I owe those guys? Rob?
Yeah, and I think that it's an interesting juxtaposition, your experience, Carlos, and Frank's experience, because Frank, I know we talked about on my show the other day, growing up in the 90s. I feel like things rapidly got much better when we weren't really focused on race. In my community, for example, I'm considered to be, Pennsylvania, rural Pennsylvania, and it's supposed to be hostile to people that, maybe LGBT people or people that are minorities. And that's not my experience. And people my age, I'm 35, no one really cared. There might be questions, legitimate questions like, hey, what's your family history and stuff like that. But the people I knew that were people of color, they didn't experience any sort of overt racism that I was aware of. And the people I knew that, are blemished or played with this broad brush of, oh, well, you don't really care about minorities. You're just a white community. I didn't see that. So I think, Frank, that maybe we're seeing as time was going on, the less we focused on race, things were getting much better. So that might explain some of the difference between your and Carlos's experience. And I'll ask you this, Frank. My concern is the more we focus on race, the more it's a self-fulfilling prophecy and it encourages these divisions. So maybe the next generation of young people won't have it as good as we had it because now race is going to be a central issue that they're forced to focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree on that point there, Rob. And I know, raising my own children, we haven't raised them in a way to focus on race or anything like that. We're a family that focuses on God primarily, and that's what we tend to focus on. So we're always looking to treat people the way, Jesus would want to treat people. And that's how we focus on our daily walk. And it is something that, as you mentioned, growing up in the 90s, I don't ever recall, maybe this is just nostalgia looking back onto 90s that, at least for me and my family, we never focused on race. We would kid around with each other. Even friends of different races would kid around with each other. If you can't laugh at each other and you're always taking each other so seriously, or you take yourself so seriously where you can't laugh at each other, it makes it for a pretty miserable world.
I agree.
Yeah. Rob just said something that I want to underscore for our listeners. If what happens if we don't focus at all on race? What happens? What's the alternative? And see that I'll tell you what the alternative is. So we'd have the show this morning, and we'd have you on, and we'd say, "Oh, you're born in Tampa Bay, huh? Well, you know, Brady sucks." See what I'm saying? See, we're off the road already, and the first thing that you did is laugh. Now, Brady doesn't suck, right? But there's a really interesting point in that. And I say this with an edge because I really want to underscore my experience, but like racism wasn't wasted on me. It's the greatest thing that ever happened to me. I mean, like single-handedly the greatest thing that ever happened to me, besides being the husband of Melinda Saldivia, is that it made me stronger, faster, smarter, more aware, more agile, more prepared. Thank you. It is the greatest gift I've ever gotten. Do you really think that the same Tom Brady that we're talking about, right? The same guy, when Tampa Bay goes to Philadelphia to play the Eagles, you think he's listening to the crowd saying, Brady sucks, Brady sucks? And when they call him names, and they don't call him really nice names, they call him really bad names, right? You ever been to Philly? Okay. I'm not saying that I don't believe in the city of brotherly love, because there's a lot of people that most of them, it's not systemic, are very nice people. But listen, I remember the Flyers in the 70s. They were mean fans, and they're mean fans in the stadium and for the Phillies and the Eagles. Why can't we be more like Brady in that sense, where we just block that out and not pay attention to it? Why are some people so stricken by it, Frank, in your opinion?
Yeah, just to underscore your point about the city of brotherly love, don't forget they also booed Santa Claus too. So I mean, but you're right. If Brady, we're using Brady as an example. If he was so focused on what people were saying in the stands, how could he even concentrate on how to play the game or how to manage his team? It would be nearly impossible if you're fixated on all the negativity. And that's something I underscored with Rob the other evening that I was on with him, is about the negative comments that you receive on social media and on YouTube. I don't focus on those negative comments. I see them. Most of them get filtered out anyway through all my filter sets I have set on there, so I don't even see them. And not saying that I can't take negativity. That's not the thing. There's a way to be constructive in your criticism of somebody that helps them build to become a better individual. If those people were out there saying, "Hey Brady, if you take an extra step back, you'll have an extra second," right. That's constructive criticism. That's not say, "Hey Brady, you suck." That's not the type of stuff.
You don't have to scramble. You can just slide. And
right.
That will help you. Right.
Correct.
Right.
And so that is we get so focused up on the negativity that we never see the positivity of the world that's around us. And there's so much positivity that's around us. If we would just let go of hatred and let go of perceived racisms instead of focusing on that all the time, maybe we could absolutely move this world to become a even better place if we were just focusing, if we would focus. And that means that at the same breath, I'm not saying that we can't acknowledge injustices. Yeah, because we have to acknowledge some of that stuff. But to say that's the entire crutch and that's the whole reason I can't succeed in life, it's an absolute cop-out.
Like the darkest injustice we've seen in a long, long time is that police officer from Minneapolis, whose name I will not say. That was an injustice. That was an injustice. And he needs to pay with the full weight of the law. That was an injustice. We know what it looks like when we see it. Right, Rob?
No, I totally agree. And that's the thing. As a country, we came together over how unjust that was and demanded that there be justice to be held accountable. So I think that one of the problems we have is we've sort of encouraged this victimhood mindset where we've said that being a victim is now the greatest currency you could have. And when you tell people that, I mean, I always just look at it like, I know, Frank, you have children. look at it this way. If you constantly tell your children if they get bad grades or something in school, oh, it's not your fault, your teachers are against you, or it's not your fault, your country's against you, they're not going to achieve as much as they could have had you encourage them to, hey, even if there are circumstances outside of what you can control, all you can control is your own actions. And so you need to work harder or study harder. And that's just one example, like the idea of getting good marks in school. But I think that instead we've encouraged generation after generation in different communities, and it's now becoming almost universal, to not take responsibility and to instead say, well, it's not my fault, the system's out to get me. Now, there may be things in the system that we need to constructively change, but as individuals, I think that if we live our life saying, I'm not going to take personal responsibility, I'm going to blame the system, that we end up seeing sort of the net results, what we're seeing today. So do you think that maybe we should try to take a step back from this culture of everyone rushing to claim that they're a victim or they're somehow an oppressor or oppressed in some way? And do you think that could go a long way to maybe seeing people achieve personally better and to help our country heal?
Absolutely, Rob. Now, one thing that you just said a second ago, it's control what you can control. I don't know how many times I must have said that in my time in retail. I would manage personnel under me all the time, being a manager above all these individuals. And I would tell them that because, my job was to prepare them for the next step. My job was always to be preparing them to want to achieve that next promotion. Right. I would want to see people to achieve more than I had achieved at that point. And I would always tell them if they were ever to be passed over or perceived to be passed over, I would tell them, I said, you can only control what you can control. I said, look in the mirror and see what you're doing wrong first before you lash out and say, that guy has it in for me. I said, because you don't know that. I said, you don't know what that other individual brought to the table. I said, so the only thing you can work on is what you can work on. And that's the same type of mentality I've passed on to my children as well. It's not, as you mentioned, it's not the teacher's fault that you got a bad grade. Did you make sure you got to class on time? How many times were you sick? How many times did you not turn in that homework? And, I'm not the parent that sits there and hovers over my child to make sure they turn in all their homework. That's called personal responsibility, where I allow them to make those mistakes. And then we can talk and correct those mistakes. I said, that's what happens when you don't sit there and study, or that's what happens when you don't turn your homework in. I said, now you can't play that sport that you want to play if you don't have that grade that you need to get in. So, that's something I think that, again, it's been a failure as a society, as parents, that we have allowed to happen. And now we're seeing that result in this victim mentality, as you mentioned, Rob, played out before us now.
Todd?
Frank, I want to go over some stuff that you've said here recently on the show, and the experience that you've had in the workforce. Did you feel or experience anything that's being talked about in the national media right now? The systems, systemic racism, those types of things with the interaction in the professional community?
I'm glad you brought that up. I early on in my career working in retail, and I'm not going to mention the place of employment because I just don't like doing that. But they're a great company, no matter what. Early on, I think when I was working my way into management, I remember being passed over 3 or 4 different times for a position I thought I deserved. And that was the problem. I thought I deserved it. And, I had people talking in my ear, Frank, I think it's because, you're Hispanic and that's why they don't want to promote you. And I let that linger there in my head for a minute. But I had to go back and recall what my parents had, raised me. It's not somebody else's fault that I'm not achieving. It's what I'm not doing. And it was real easy to look back and see why I was being passed over. And for me in that particular instance was I had a tardy issue. I was tardy quite often. And, to be honest with you, I was very lucky to have my job for being as tardy as I was. And once I was able to clean that up and make an effort in showing them, hey, I can be reliable, I can be depended on, things started to happen for me because they knew I had the work ethic. It was just trying to clean up some of those things because they needed somebody in a position of responsibility that was going to be responsible, be there when they needed to open doors or close the doors up or whatever. They needed someone there to make sure that was all done. And you can't have a person in management that don't show those qualities, and you can't sit there and lecture your employees saying, well, you got to get on working time. They could just point at you, hey, you were late the other day. So, you know, it was something that you had to look inward. But yeah, definitely there were people around me that I worked with that did believe there was some type of systemic racism that was going on, and the reason I wasn't being passed up. But that was coming from their own failures as well of not being promoted or whatever because of their perceived notions, which, you know, I could quickly point out if I had an opportunity with them to show them what they were probably not doing well. Well,
don't feel bad, Frank. On occasion, my wife has referred to me as her late husband. So I would like you to talk to me about, I'm very, very interested in your mornings. So tell me about your faith and the how you set up your morning. And I only caught a glimpse of it listening to the radio show with Rob this week, but it really piqued my interest, and I'd like you to be able to talk a little bit about it.
Yeah, sure. Well, my faith has something that I have for a long time really had struggled with, and I really didn't really understand it. You know, it's not that my parents didn't take me to church or anything like that. You know, we did go to church, but you know, we weren't very faithful going to church as growing up. It wasn't until I met my wife that I really started to she started to really open my eyes on, you know, the teachings of Jesus and the Bible. And even then, it wasn't until just a couple years ago I actually accepted Christ into my heart and became a follower. So I'm still a fairly young Christian in that sense. And it wasn't until this last March is where I really made it a focus on my own channel, on my YouTube channel, of actually presenting the gospel and presenting a opportunity for people to come together and pray. And it was after President Trump had called for prayer of the nation. If you guys remember that, it was back in March. It was like mid-March. It was like the 13th of March, somewhere in there. And I said, okay, well, you know what? That sounds like something I can get behind. Let me go ahead and then, you know, I'm going to start having these prayer meetings on my channel until this pandemic is over. Well, I started having these meetings. We're about 3 months in now of having these meetings. And it was something that really God started to really convict me of making sure that I did not let this slide and let this fall to the wayside. And this was something that I should continue to do. And I've actually expanded it now to where I do 7 prayer meetings a week in the morning. And then I do 3 additional ones in the evening throughout the week. And it's just a wonderful area for Christians to come to. And because, you know, entertainment and places on YouTube sometimes don't like to focus on their faith or the teachings of Jesus in their broadcast. So, you know, my mornings start most of the time about 6 a.m. and I get up and I already have the devotions kind of set up and ready to go. And I kind of go back over them. And I have this prayer book. I know your viewers can't see it or your listeners can't see it, but I have this prayer book that's pretty thick with a lot of people's prayers in it. And I go back through it and, you know, and if I notice somebody's missing, we take a moment and we make sure we include them in prayers because they're missing for a reason. So we want to make sure we pray for them. So it's been definitely something that I've found very uplifting in my own life. And I hope that people are out there gaining something from it as well. So thank you for asking about that.
How does it look like? Just give us a 15 or 20 second idea of what that is, what the show is. I know you say,
yeah, sure. You know, we have the stream in the morning and we come in and the first minute or two, you know, I recognize everybody that's in there and, you know, and then we go to a scripture that I have picked out for a devotion. We go and we talk about it. And then, you know, I try to make sure it applies to something that's currently going on. And then from that point, I open up the stream for prayers. You know, anybody that has a prayer, and we keep it non-political. And when I say non-political, we're not there to debate whether something's going wrong with the country. We're there to pray for political figures. I mean, if they want to pray for a Democrat, hey, yeah, everybody needs prayer. And so, there's no limits of who we're going to pray for, but we just don't get into a political debate or arguments.
Well, I would like to be able to have to make a request and have some prayers sent out to Todd Bartley, who is a very funny looking sinner, and if you could do that for us, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, sure.
Speaking of media people, Frank, who is the mob?
Who's the mob?
Yeah.
In my opinion, is the mob is what we see is the people that have this victim mentality that they've had given to them through years of indoctrination into schools, and then these empty promises that these politicians that continue to put out there. They keep telling these individuals that they're oppressed, or that even you look at even like the Bernie people that's saying that they deserve more. They should be the ones running companies and stuff like that. And they've made this entire mob, and then it's the job of the politicians to continue to feed this, and then it falls into the media where they fan those flames and hope to get a reaction out of it. And they look for something to highlight, and they say, see, right there, that's injustice right there. That's what's happening across our nation because of the 1% or because of systemic racism. And it's just a play on people's emotions, and you can rally up any person if you're able to find that emotion that you're going to find most triggering, and then you can definitely reach it out to more than one individual, because everybody can. You can get people, unfortunately, you can get people rally behind. Yeah, those people are unfair to us. We should be making $15 an hour. Or we should be making $20 an hour. We should have free healthcare. And you get those people wound up, you got yourself a mob.
So, but specifically, I know what protesters are. I understand, but the rioters and the looters and the arsonists and the people who are creating mayhem, general mayhem, they're not the protesters, right? This is being co-opted by specific people and specific agendas under the guise of social justice, right?
Yes, if you dig down to it, there is a definite Marxist roots into these different anarchy groups and different domestic terrorist groups is what they are. They're looking to destabilize the country. They're looking to basically overthrow our system of government that we currently have. And this has been going on for quite a few decades. I mean, it's been a slow walk, but it seems to have accelerated now that they have so many different people in different positions of power, media, academia, politics. You go back and they give you your roadmap, their roadmaps to how they're going to do that. You can go back to the Rules for Radicals by Alinsky. You can look at that. Then you can look at many other the writings from Marx and everybody else of how to topple a government. And how you do that is you have to, first of all, one of their very first steps is always to break up the nuclear family. You got to break up the nuclear family before you can start pushing this type of injustice and start splitting individuals, and then they can dive into the races and use that as well.
And did you
definitely a Marxist movement?
And did you notice, Frank, that if you read Black Lives Matter's list of demands, they are actively encouraging breaking up the nuclear family. And another step that's one of the first steps that you see is demoralizing or removing a local police force. That's another step that we saw. And so, yeah, I think you're exactly right that that's what we see that's occurring with these people. What would your advice be for leadership? If you had the ear, for example, of Donald Trump, do you think at this point that I think it would be kind of taking the bait to go into somewhere like Seattle where they've set up this free zone and use troops to clear them out? Would you like to see Trump be more aggressive, or do you think that maybe he should kind of play back a little and allow these utopias to kind of show themselves for the terrible places that they are?
Well, this is one of the topics I've been split on for a bit now. Part of me says, continue to allow the protesters to just flourish, but I think it's as a sign of strength at this point now is to kind of go in, because if we look at it, places like CHOP or CHAZ or whatever they call themselves these days, they've actually taken a piece of American land. They've taken it and they've set up their entire concept behind it. So they're particularly not even American at this point. So at this point, you send in the army, you surround them, and you starve them out. It's and you don't even have to fire a shot. You just cut off all their supplies, and you cut off their power, their cell service, and most of these kids are going to be coming out crying and whimpering anyway. And as they're coming in, you make them go through the immigration process to become U.S. citizens once again, and make them sit in the list.
Right, and just real quick, and then we'll go to Todd. It wouldn't even be starving them out, right? Because they claim they'll be fine without the U.S. government. So it's a win-win, right? Like if, hey, you guys, you got your garden where you threw cardboard box with topsoil on it, and you're going to grow, your crops will flourish, we're assuming. So it's a win-win for everyone. That's how I would look at it. Todd?
Yeah, I kind of like Frank's new idea to put him back through the immigration system to reapply for United States citizenship. I think that would wake a lot of people up real quick. And to watch what's going on in Seattle right now, they're not autonomous. They're getting direct financial and resource assistance from the mayor of Seattle. They're bringing in the porta potties and they're emptying them. They're removing the garbage. They're bringing in any number of heavy pieces of equipment to move things around and barriers. And what's interesting is when some things went sideways the other day, I saw a viral video that said, well, call the police. And I'm sitting there going, what? Didn't you guys just say disband the police and defund the police? It makes absolutely no sense.
Well, there was 2 people shot last night. One died. And this is in CHOP. 2 people were shot. One died, and one was critically wounded. And guess who they called to do the investigation? It wasn't the warlord Raz that's running the show there. They called the police. They called the paramedics. And it's almost like they have no self-realization. Like, this is an admission that your system's failing. You can't succeed without the outside help from the capitalist system that you're indicting. So, yeah, I mean, it's incredibly frustrating.
Let's not let Frank off the hook. Those are very nice questions, but here it is, Frank. I'm not going to ask you what you think President Trump should do. I'm going to ask you what President Frank would do.
President Frank would have had no mercy. I would have probably sent in the troops that first night and broke it all up, and probably had a mass arrest. So I don't know how long I would have been president after that, but that's what President Frank would have done. Can
I tell you how long you would have been president?
Yeah, go right ahead.
So the most interesting things for me in watching what's happening right now in our country is listening to, so I'll give you an example from the COVID side, right, Todd? 40 million people unemployed. There's likely going to be 5 million businesses that are never coming back. Your mom died and you weren't able to spend her last moments on earth with her. You built a business that took you 30 years, but in 7.5 minutes, rioters destroyed it. And when they called the police 13 times in 911, and the police said, we're coming, and they never did, to use your words, President Frank, empty promises, I think you'd be in office for a very long time.
And just to, real quick, Carlos, just to,
Whoops.
just to go up on that point there is that, I thought that the president should have acted very quickly. If it was President Frank, I would have used the Insurrection Act and absolutely sent military to all those areas and regained control. And any general that would have stepped out of line and said that, oh, that was wrong, that was politicized, so that general will be off the staff, he'd be fired or whatever you got to do. Because I need people around this administration that is going to be pushing the agenda of this president. And that's what we need. And unfortunately, we do have a lot of cowards that are in high positions still.
So tell me tell me something that's the most important thing in closing that's going on right now that you'd like to talk about.
The most important thing that we need to talk about right now, and it always gets overshadowed, is local elections. Local elections is where we need to be focusing our efforts on. Yes, it's great that we're all going to go out and vote for President Trump because he's going to continue to look out for America First interests. But our local levels, we see the local failures across this country over the last couple of weeks, a couple of months. We've seen how feckless they've been, how weak leaders they are. Local elections is where it's at. That's where we have to get most involved, and that's where your voice will be heard the loudest, is in the local election. So many times it always gets overshadowed by the big federal elections and things like that. We have to focus and vet every one of these local people running for office, because many of them have funding from outside of the state, outside of your community, that you don't even know about. And if you don't think you can run for office, don't kid yourself. A lot of these people are dumb as rocks, and you would do a much better job than they would. So don't sell yourself short if you feel like you want to make a change and you want to run for office. It doesn't take a whole lot to get into a local office. You need just a petition, enough names, whatever that count is, and that's something you can do and get on a ballot and start making a difference in your own community.
Good, Todd.
Well, I certainly want to make sure that I tell you how much we appreciate you coming on. Are there any other comments from you, Todd or Rob?
Good, Todd.
I think Rob does, but he's currently muted.
No, I was just saying, go ahead, Todd.
I'm just curious, Frank, about how you'd clear out CHOP or CHAZ. Would you go in with the like the D9000 bulldozers and just start shoving the barricades out of the way, or what would be the tactical plan to reclaim 6 city blocks?
That's a very good question. I like your idea of taking the bulldozers through there and through the streets and just clearing it all out. I would like to make it as a show of force as possible without obviously using lethal methods, but definitely show of force as showing, hey, we're not playing around. You guys wanted this. Now you're getting it. And this is how we're going to treat people that are trying to succeed from the union. We are not going to have it. And, just as much force as we could show without actually using any lethal means by like actually shooting bullets. But if we need to, if they're going to throw rocks or whatever, or try to, or fire, I'm not going to tie the hands of my personnel. I'm going to let them do what they need to do.
Yeah, and I'll just say real quick, just to finish up with this, I couldn't agree with you more about the importance of local elections and about people needing to run. I'm trying to run for federal Congress in 2022, but any office you could run for, you're absolutely right. It's something we've talked about before. The only disadvantage you listening have, it's not that you would govern worse or that you know less about governing. It's just that you don't know how to win elections. You don't have the connections or the money or the resources. But knowing how to win an election does not mean you know how to govern. And we're seeing that over and over with people in both parties in this country. So, yeah, I just want to thank you again for coming, Frank. I think you're always one of my favorite people to talk to, and I really appreciate it. For those of you that are on the chat and could see, I put a link up to Frank's channel. If you're just listening to us, it's just search Let's Be Frank on YouTube, and you can subscribe to him and join those prayer groups and hear his other thoughts on things. So, thanks so much, Carlos. Did you go ahead?
And it's Let's Be Frank on almost all social media platforms, right?
Yes. The only difference is on Twitter, it's Let's Be Frank 2410 is where you can find me. So at Let's Be Frank 2410, and all the other places like Parler or Facebook, it's all Let's Be Frank. So you can find me on those other social medias as well. Even Clout Hub too. I'm just joined there recently, so check me out over on Clout Hub.
Okay, one more question, and I'm just going to interrupt Todd here because I'm sure he's curious too. NFL wise, you're a Tampa Bay guy still or no?
Actually, no. I've never grew up as a Tampa Bay Buccaneer fan. My mom was a very fair weather fan growing up. She would always cheer for the winning Super Bowl champion. And I grew up in the 80s. And while my team.
Oh, no.
Oh, Jimmy Garoppolo.
Yes, sir. Yeah, the 49ers was the team that I grew up with in the 80s, and I just stayed a fan. I was not like my mother. I was not a fair weather fan, so I've been a team of the Brown Town there for quite some time. Unfortunately, I do not enjoy the politics of that city, or the people that come from there, but that's the team I grew up rooting for, and I still kind of root for from time to time.
Well, there's an obvious San Francisco Tampa Bay connection now with Tom Brady being the quarterback there. Growing up, idolizing
Joe Montana.
Montana and the 49ers.
Yeah.
Frank, thank you so much. You're welcome on the show at any time. And it is just an absolutely fantastic pleasure. Please come on board again.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on and giving me this opportunity.
Thanks so much.
You.
All right,
Thanks,
God bless.
Frank.
So that was neat, right, guys?
Oh yeah, Frank's not only one of the nicest people you'll ever meet, but incredibly intelligent. And I really recommend checking out his channel. He's one of my favorite people that I've worked with. And I think that it's very interesting, just like you, Carlos, that one of the things you hear a lot is, well, if you're not of a certain race, then it's hard for you to subjectively understand people that are of that certain race. And so right. I think that that's nonsense, but it's always good to have someone come on and just be able to talk about what their experience was that's kind of counter to what we're being pushed upon by the mainstream narrative.
Well, and thank you for leading me in, because I'm going to ask you about Representative Gaetz' fight with the Louisiana House Republican or House Democrat this week. Listen, we are either all created equal or we're not. And if you can't grasp the propositions that were put into the Declaration of Independence regarding the idea that we are all created equal, that means that we have all the capacity to understand that all our general experiences are able to be understood by anybody. So I'm not saying that I know racism better than you. I'm saying that I experienced it, and I know that you'll understand me because you understand injustice.
Right.
That's not what we're saying today, though. We're saying something different. I don't want to get into that right this second. Tell us what happened today. Tell us today what happened just 2 days ago in one of the House committee meetings in Congress with Representative Gaetz, representative from Florida, and the U.S. representative from Louisiana, and the fight that they had.
So the rep from Louisiana, I don't remember, but he's a black gentleman who's a Democrat, and they're having a discussion about systemic racism, and Matt Gaetz is speaking up, and the representative from Louisiana, the Democrat, says, well, you don't know because you're not a person of color and you don't have children that are people of color. And Gaetz interrupts and says, wait a minute, you're telling me that I don't understand what it's like to have a child of color, because he does. He's adopted a person of Cuban heritage who's 19 years old now, and he's raised that boy as his child. And he says, so I do understand. To which the representative from Louisiana replies, well, clearly you don't care as much about your son as I do because of their political disagreements. And Gaetz is livid. He says, how dare you? How dare you accuse me of not caring about my son just because we're having a political disagreement here? And he claimed that it wanted it struck from the record because it was very unbecoming of a representative of Congress to claim that someone did not care about their child just because they're talking about racial differences. The clip ends with this, again, Democrat black gentleman from Louisiana saying, oh, did I touch a nerve? And it goes to show the callous nature of the people that claim to be our moral superiors. You see this occur over and over again where they will say that you can never criticize them. Any criticism of them is, and they break it down in this identity politics. Oh, you're criticizing me because I'm black. Oh, you're criticizing me because I'm a woman or because I'm in the LGBT community. In reality, that's just a tool they're using to stop any legitimate criticism of them. And what you end up seeing is that they use bigotry and racism of the past, which again, we could talk about. This country's not perfect, of course. There are things that needed addressed, but they use the racism of the past to justify their bigotry and racism today. Because make no mistake about it, telling a white person who has a child of color, you can't understand your child, is racism. And so you see this over and over. They point to racism 200 years ago to say, that justifies me being a racist today.
So, Todd, based on what Rob just said, is the issue when you have to reach back centuries to make your point today, is the issue about race, or is it about power and money and a grab and a clutching at those things?
It's no question it's a power grab. And let me ask you guys this. The last time you saw anybody visiting the United States or wanting to emigrate, if you will, right, to the United States, when's the last time you heard any one of those people that's fleeing an oppressive nation going, I want to come to America to express the bias and the inherent racism in the United States? They never say that. They're coming here to live in the freest nation on the planet.
Ilhan Omar does.
Right? And they're
unbelievably,
leaving,
I'm sorry, but yeah.
They're leaving places in the globe that are actually living that standard of systemic racism and oppression on a daily basis. They're fleeing that to come here. You think they're leaving that to come here to experience the same thing?
Yeah. I could never get my head around the fact that people just don't understand the sacrifice that people make to try to get into this country, legally or illegally. Okay. And what do you do with those people?
I mean, think about what Frank said. Folks, don't let this be missed. Frank said he's of a multi-generational family that came to this country and they harvested crops out of fields. And the guy spent the better part of 3 decades in the professional sector, having a great career. From the time he was 5 being in those fields, overcoming that, being better for his family, and giving back to his parents that raised him, obviously the right way, to have the right moral compass and moral fortitude and great work ethic, overcoming the tardy issue that he talked about, and making a great life for himself and his family. So we're actively being systemically racist and oppressing people in 2020? Meanwhile, yanking statues down from people that have no bearing on today and can make no changes and have no insight into today because they've been gone for a couple hundred years.
Well, when you look at, for example, one of the issues I studied is domestic Islamic terrorism. And one of the things that I find really intriguing is when you look at the numbers, it's almost...
Tell them why, Rob. Tell them why.
Tell them why
domestic... studied that.
Oh, but just because, I did it through debate, and also because there's no one else studying it. So the reason that I was talking about this is policy debate I did in university. We had to do a bunch of research. What you see is a lot of domestic Islamic terrorism is second generational. And the reason is this. Most of those parents, that the first generation Islamic immigrants, most of them are fleeing oppressive Islamic regimes. And they still, look, they have their faith, totally cool, but they don't like the politicization of it. So they flee somewhere like Iran, and they come here because they appreciate this American country, the ideas of personal liberty, responsibility, and they just want to work hard. But then there's this indoctrination that occurs from people predominantly in the establishment left that tells their family over and over again, this country hates you, it's systemically racist, you're a victim, you'll never achieve. And oftentimes it's the second generation that starts listening to this victimhood narrative and says, yes, this country is evil. The United States is evil. And that's when you start to see a lot of the bad things that come as a result of that. But Todd's absolutely right. The people that are coming here, especially legally, they're coming here because they understand that so much of this world is still a dark and depressing place. And although the United States will never be perfect, it is a beacon of light in this world. And the arguments that we hear coming from the academia and the establishment left about how horrible the United States is, and it's this terrible, depressing place, and we need to tear it all down, and we need to get rid of the Enlightenment, and we need to get rid of the Constitution. That's a huge mistake. Those are the things that make this country the greatest in the world.
Well, and, the reason why Marxists are selling white cops systemically, are on the hunt for unarmed black men to murder them solely because of racism, not homicidal, megalomania, but racism, is because they have legions of buyers for this specific idea. How did that happen, Todd?
Okay, so let me ask you a question, and it's part of my response. You mentioned, and we're not going to use the name of the guy in Minneapolis that extinguished a life, right? That's just abhorrent. But I've read online and done a little research that there were 18 complaints against that particular law enforcement official for use of excessive force or other complaints in his law enforcement career. So there's a phrase that's used in legal parlance. It's called de minimis. It was de minimis, de minimis, de minimis. So when you get to 18 de minimis acts, okay, was it the fifth one that was bad? Was it the 10th one that was bad? Was it the fifth? How many de minimis acts do you need for this clown to demonstrate to you he's unfit to be a police officer?
Rob, can I handle that?
Yeah. Sure.
I hear you. But the mayor, the police chief, the leadership structure, the unions. Camden, New Jersey is a fantastic model. Camden was a really ugly place. Lots of murders, lots of violence. And the way that they basically did it is that they kind of fired all the police officers in Camden and then went regional. Does that make sense, Rob? You know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
Okay. And then what they did was they started hiring police officers back, but without union protection. No unions. And so the unions weren't there to stick up for cops that were bad cops. Is the number one problem in the United States in the police culture that's the most toxic. Good police officers hate bad cops. So without the union, without those protections of cops being able to go to unions that would protect them 18 times, Todd, and mayors and police chiefs acting in tandem, what happens in Minneapolis doesn't happen without Mayor Frey and the police chief there not acting in tandem. Ditto for Seattle. Ditto for Detroit. Ditto for Chicago. Ditto for Baltimore. The police chief was acting in tandem with, let me make it clear, Democrat mayors that do not have a spine, that didn't care about the people there, that had businesses that took 30 years to build and 7.5 minutes to destroy. Rob?
No, I agree. I absolutely agree. Todd, where were you? That was just part of your response.
Yeah, because all the legislation that's now being kicked around state level and nationally, they're going to start stripping those protections out to address situations of use of excessive force or bad behavior. And again, listen, let's get this straight. I'm not anti-law enforcement by any stretch of the imagination, because without it, you're going to have CHAZ and CHOP, right? So we need law and order in this country. What I'm not for, and I think Carlos hit the nail on the head, is good cops can't stand bad cops. You got to root out some people. I think Mike DeWine, the governor of Ohio, had it perfect yesterday. Absolutely perfect in what he's looking at in law enforcement reform, not just police, but law enforcement reform. He said, you know what? There are current people in uniform that just aren't fit for the uniform right now. Right?
Well,
so we've got to get the people that want to be good, upstanding police officers to uphold the law. And let's keep something else in mind. Every time they put that uniform on, every time they put the badge on, every time they put on the personal protective equipment, if you will, and you can figure out what that is as a police officer, member of law enforcement, they take the chance of not coming home to their families that night. So let's keep this in perfect perspective, okay? When we talk about law enforcement and police and everything else, it's a situation where you have to address it case by case. And if these situations are going to keep presenting themselves with the same individuals involved, once, right, it's an accident. Second time in the same type of situation, maybe a little bit of bad judgment. The third time, you're probably out of a job.
Well, and I agree. And look, here's the truth. There are plenty of real solutions that we could have. What I've argued from the get-go is, in order to have a real solution, you have to correctly identify the problem. And so if we just say, the problem's systemic racism, the problem is black or cops for racist reasons shooting and killing unarmed blacks, that's just not true. The data doesn't back that up. But if that's the story that we're now trying to solve, okay, how do we stop this epidemic of racist cops shooting unarmed blacks? Well, that epidemic doesn't exist, so what possible solution could you have to solve a problem that doesn't exist? And so we overlook the solutions you're talking about, Todd. And when I'm arguing with people that are trying to say, you're against this, so you're a racist, you're against Black Lives Matter. Of course Black Lives Matter. All lives matter. But the problem is, it's more than just that statement. It's a political movement. And the solutions that are being offered by Black Lives Matter are things that would destroy this country and make the problem so much worse in inner city black communities. So, for example, abolish the police. That's a movement, or that's a policy suggestion from Black Lives Matter. The first group of people that will be most immediately affected by abolishing the police are poor inner city blacks, because that's where crime will spike. A study that was done after Ferguson showed that in the 2 years after Ferguson, in other places where police officers were investigated under accusations of systemic racism, it said that there was as many as 4,000 increased homicides. 4,000 in the 4 cities where those DOJ investigations happened, because it encouraged what they called the Ferguson effect, which were police not going into these neighborhoods as much. So it's actually at least I'm sure you two agree with this, my argument with the policy prescriptions that's coming out of Black Lives Matter, in part, is you're literally going to make the situation worse for Black Americans. And so why would that be? The fact that we can't say this without being canceled proves that the problem is, this isn't about solving the issues of police brutality. It's not about solving black homicides, which there's about 7,000 that occur a year, most of which are perpetrated by blacks themselves. They don't care to solve that. This is about something more. It's about power. It's about overthrowing the United States and the history of it. I mean, they want things like segregation of hospitals, segregations of school. This is in the official claims that Black Lives Matter, their list of demands in CHAZ.
Their manifesto.
Right. This is things they want. They seek not to have a just society built on the principles of the Founding Fathers. They want to remove those principles. What they want is an inverse of what they've seen as injustices in the past. They want a return to Jim Crow. They want a return to slavery. They want a return to segregation. It's just they want to be the ones in charge. And we can't stand for that.
I am going to ask you and posit the most subversive idea I have ever asked or proposed in my entire life. And I am full of subversive ideas. Do you guys believe in the swamp? Yes, right?
Yeah.
Do you guys believe in the deep state?
Yep.
The administrative state?
Yeah.
Given what the FBI did, going back 3.5 years, maybe a little longer, if you want to include what they did to Hillary Rodham Clinton. Given what they did to General Flynn and how they operated, and how they operated with the Mueller investigation, are we actually in Obama's third term? I
mean, yes. I say this all the time. I didn't invent this.
The president, is the 43rd president or 44th president of the United States still ruling through the swamp, the deep state, the administrative state, the FBI, aspects of the State Department, and aspects of the Department of Justice?
Yes, absolutely. But it's even more than that, right? Andrew Breitbart said, politics is downstream of culture. While Republicans were worried about winning elections for the past 50 years, establishment left-leaning people were controlling academia, they were controlling Hollywood, they were controlling Silicon Valley, they were controlling the media. And they also were in control of unelected bureaucrats such as the administrative state and the intel communities like you're talking about. And so we've seen, never before in the history of our country have we seen a president be attacked by every single institution constantly. Constant attacks. And they're blatantly hypocritical. For example, the media is furious that Trump's having a rally this week because of COVID. Yet at the same time, they endorsed the rallies or the protests for Black Lives Matter. And it goes on and on and on. Any one of these situations, if you put the shoe on the other foot, for example, if Trump used paid opposition research to spy on Joe Biden's campaign, there would be, again, riots in the street. But because it happened to Trump and all these institutions go this way, that is exactly what's going on. And it's not just Obama's third term. It's more like the establishment's 10th term in a row or longer. They've controlled things for years. That's exactly, and you know this, Carlos, I say this on my show all the time. Let me reach out and throw an olive branch to my friends on the left. What's your issue you care about? Climate change? You care about Medicare for all? Something like that? Guess what? Your issue doesn't matter. Neither does your issue on the right. Why? Because our votes don't matter. Because unelected bureaucrats and people that control the culture, including people like George Soros, Bill Gates, people that use their money to influence our system, they're the only opinions that matter. And because of that, electing Trump so far, it's just been a constant struggle of Trump fighting back against this corruption that's going at him. Has he done perfect? No. But that's what the administration's been.
Why shouldn't the right start abusing power the way the left does? Todd?
Oh, I was going to go back to the first one you said about the third term of the 44th
Sorry,
president.
I'm sorry.
I just wanted to posit another question with a question and go, well, if that's true, if we're in the third term, how do we have systemic racism? If I'm not mistaken, we elected the first Black president in the country's history for 2 terms.
And
you're saying there may be a third.
I dare say that if anyone diverted away from conversations that unite us, like the NFL and other things, it was President Barack Obama, who singularly focused on race, in spite of the fact that even if you didn't vote for President Obama, you at least hoped that with a Black president, we would break on through to the other side.
Doors reference.
Yeah, it's worse now than it's ever been.
But listen, there's no question who started this. He did. It's on him.
Okay, so let me ask you.
Go ahead.
If we're ever going to fix this, we have to first start the conversation with, okay, you are equal to me as a human being.
But what do you do with people that are not really but that would be fantastic on people who are of good faith. I have a friend. His name is Rick Mouzon. Okay. Rick would rather rather talk about cars than anything else in his life. Okay. I can have a conversation with Rick because he's not one of those people that's co-opted the movement. You can't have a conversation with someone who took a brick and threw it through your window. Can you, Todd?
Well, no. I got to tell you.
No, you can't. You can't.
Well, no, just keep going with that one because it was a brick through the window, 2 sets of tires slashed, run off the road, and graffiti all over the truck. So I've already lived, the protesting, the rioting, absolutely. The looting. I've already lived it firsthand.
That's exactly why I said it. But my point is that there is and this is why I consistently ask the same question over and over and over again, Rob, is who is the mob? Well, the mob isn't people like Rick Mouzon. Okay? That's not him. It's other people.
Local failed rappers that are using fake names running around asking for pardons because they want to go back to what they were doing back in the day. I'm sorry, Rob. Did I interrupt? I'm sorry.
But for those of you who don't know, that's something that actually happened to Todd. Look, here's the deal. I've said this for years. The danger of Antifa, and I just use them as an example, but this mob in general, the danger of them isn't that they're super well trained or they're muscular or they're threatening. Not to say that them beating people with bike locks and all the carnage that they've caused isn't important. But the real danger is they're backed up by people with establishment power. That's the real danger. And so, for example, the conversation we're having here, can you have a conversation with that person that threw a brick? No, you can't. But where does it start? Why is that person given legitimacy? Let me posit something to you. Do you remember when Eric Holder said that this nation was too cowardly to have a conversation about race? Yeah. What Eric Holder, and I brought this up in a debate I did with some left-wingers here recently. I said what Eric Holder was really saying was, this nation is too cowardly to agree with me that it's systemically racist and there's a problem with white people. That's what he means by a conversation. Right. You have to agree with his premise, then we could talk. And these people told me, no, that's not what he meant. What he meant is that this country is too cowardly to admit that they're systemically racist. Yes, that's exactly what I just said.
Yeah,
and
we're not that stupid. Sorry.
Right. And so, so that's the problem. We've legitimized this sort of, well, you have to agree with us or there is no conversation. Let me give you another example just from today. Dan Rather, former professional journalist, right? He tweeted out that if we see a spread of COVID after the Tulsa rally, the Trump rally today that's occurring in Tulsa, or if we see violence, it's Trump's fault. And what Dan Rather's really saying without saying it is, we don't want the other side to be allowed to be part of the conversation. Trump and his supporters should not be allowed to have their voice heard. If their voice is heard, that's violence, that's dangerous. However, we should be allowed to have our voice heard whenever we want. This is the real power with Black Lives Matter. You want to know how powerful Black Lives Matter is? Name me one corporation that isn't endorsing them. Name me one politician, you might see Trump, maybe one or two, that have actually stood up and said, we're against this movement of Black Lives Matter. Or how about anyone in academia? Or how about anyone in Silicon Valley? You can't name any. Yet, not only is that power, but the incredible power they wield is, while they wield all of that institutional power, they claim that all of the institutions are against them and racist. That's unbelievable power. They control the power of culture while at the same time convincing you that the culture's against them. That's incredible.
It's not social justice activism.
So
it's
I saw
a focused attempt to start and escalate a racial war that Barack Obama began. End of story.
So
you're not going to convince us otherwise because of the way that the things that you do manifest themselves. Todd?
I saw something earlier in the week, right live out of CHAZ, right out of CHOP, okay? And whatever the rapper's name is, he talked about, well, we're going to do this and we're going to do that, and then hands the mic off to somebody else that was ready to perform a song or something. And the next thing you know, this young woman grabs the mic, uses every expletive under the sun, as this other person who was going to perform a song has the mic snatched from them and then ganged up on her. Oh, no, she's got to talk. Then this young woman announces what they're going to do next. We're going to go protest, and we're going to say this, and we're going to say that, and this is where we're going. And 5 other people go, no, we're going over there. They can't even keep their story straight.
The Keystone Cops.
They can't even keep their story straight.
Yeah.
And we're supposed to give them the time and listen to this nonsense. So give us your list of demands. So every time we give you a porta potty and we empty it, what's next? And you keep going, you keep going, you keep going. What are they doing to better the society other than look at me, I'm doing this as an act of civil disobedience? It's not about generating a job. It's not about building a company. It's we're going to live off the city. What is that?
Well, it's... Go ahead. I was going to say, this is just... I saw this in academia in 2004. Right? I saw what this is.
Great point.
I was in policy debate. And for those of you who don't know, I went to Clarion University. There are no divisions. So I debated Harvard, Yale, all of these places. And I became one of the best debaters in the country. Humble brag there. But one of the things you saw was debate was the left of the left. So if you think academia is left-wing, debate was far left-wing. To be a centrist, if you were in the middle of the political discussion in debate, that would be like Bernie Sanders. That was the center. If you were right-wing, you were considered off the chart, like just being a middle-of-the-road conservative. And so it was nothing to walk into a debate round, and you would be debating 2 black people, and they would say, white people should be eliminated from the face of the earth. Why haven't you acknowledged your privilege as a white man? You need to forfeit this round to give the victory to a person of color. The same with women. If you had a radical feminist team, they would say, you're a man. Men should be wiped from the planet. Patriarchy's evil, blah, blah, blah. I
We're
learned
not created equal.
Right. I learned that I could not, because debate was so left wing and your judge was predominantly left wing. I couldn't defend myself. I couldn't say, yeah, I'm white and that's good. Or, yeah, I'm a man and that's good. I literally had to say, well, I'm not really white because being white is a choice. Or I'm not really a man because being a man is a choice. And I warned my friend, I didn't have a platform at the time, but I warned people in my life. I said, this is coming. Debate's just 5 to 10 years ahead of academia, and academia is just 5 to 10 years ahead of the real world. The people that I'm debating from Harvard, from all these other schools, they're going to be in positions of power in the next 10 to 15 years. And that's exactly what we see. And I'm telling you, what they want is for the country to burn. Go into these academic departments of feminism. They'll tell you, they don't even hide it. They say, we need to dismantle the institutionally oppressive systems of this country. And what do they mean? They mean capitalism. They mean the documents of the founding fathers. That's what they want to dismantle. And they're dead serious about it. And when you talk to people, they'll lie to you if you seem reasonable. Like when I was debating people the other day. Oh, no. It's not about white people. It's not about blaming white people for something. It's just blah, blah, blah. They tore down a statue in Portland of George Washington yesterday. You know what they wrote on it? Defund white people. White fragility. That's the movement. Now, I'm not saying this because I want to say, woe is me as a white person. That's not what I'm saying. I'm telling you that the real agenda from the people that are running Black Lives Matter is the destruction of the United States as we know it, a return to segregation, and inflaming racial tensions where it's just that they want people that they consider victim groups to now be in the positions of power to enact retribution on any group they consider an oppressor.
Consider this. The worst part of what happened in Portland 2 nights ago when they pulled down the George Washington statue wasn't that they pulled the statue down. It wasn't what they wrote on the statue. It was that Portland said they're not going to put it back up again.
Right.
Number one. So you have the collusion of government and you have the collusion of corporations. So I would like you today, if you're listening.
Well, Carlos, let me ask you a quick question. About putting a statue back up, if I may.
Yeah.
Okay, there's federal ground or federal buildings or federal land in and around Portland, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, or could be claimed federal land. What happens when the president or the Department of the Interior says, hey, guess what? On federal land, we're putting GW back up.
Yeah. No, but the point is that because of media, the mayor of Portland said, we're not putting it back up. See, that's the problem that we're dealing with.
Okay, don't let us put it back up and your CARES Act funding's gone. Where have we heard that before?
Right.
Yep.
But
at the state level, have we heard that one before?
So for people to try to understand, though, because what we're trying to do in this show is give people an ability to stand on their own 2 feet. So we got to kind of deconstruct some of these things.
So are you saying you don't want people taking a knee? Is that what you're saying, Carlos?
Yes. No, I don't. And by the way, I will never take a knee.
Unless you're
Ever.
proposing or getting knighted. Right.
Right. And so before I lose my train of thought, politicians are complicit because they use the media to be able to convey their ideas. They're signaling, we're not taking the statue back up. We're not putting it back up. Corporations do the same thing. If you're listening to this show or you're watching us right now, I want you to understand that I'd like you to go and search in your cell phones and look up the word globalists, and then look up the word Marxist, and then look up the word statist. Because the corporations have never in their lives been in a better position than they are today, because now they have rioters that they give money to that wipe out their competition. See, the people that sell Nikes and Williamsport that have their businesses burnt down, who benefits? Nike. Amazon. You've just destroyed the competition for Amazon and Nike. That's why they give millions of dollars to Black Lives Matter. All the corporations, including Amazon, and Netflix and Twitter and all the things that we use in our apps in our phone, all of them are virtue signaling how loyal they are to social justice. Let me ask you a question. It's a simple question. Let's make believe I'm LinkedIn. Give me an example of a time in your life. Now I'm asking you and Todd, Rob. Give me an example in a time in your life where you have saved someone from injustice, or you have saved someone from racial injustice. Tell me your resume.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly happened. I've seen acts, people say overtly racist things that I've literally gotten fistfights over. I don't like to talk about charity that I give to or donate to, but I try to look at myself. The lesson I've learned is that I'm not better than anyone and no one's better than me. And so when I've taken the opportunity in my time to see people, even those in positions of color that seemed like they were in a tough spot, I've done my best to help them. I'm not going to say I'm perfect, but I've spoke up for people in academic circles, for example, that I saw in debate, people of color that were called Uncle Tom for not agreeing with the predominant orthodoxy that was going on in the academic black community. So I've certainly done things like that.
But you don't have to be a smartass and answer me. Okay, my point is that on the whole, people don't have resume to go out and social justice warrior for other people.
Well, here's the truth.
Do you think that you can do that better and protect me? You can protect me better than me?
Well, and the other thing is, I learned this a long time ago. If you engage in goodwill or charity and then you're announcing it, then it wasn't really about the goodwill or charity, right?
Dangerous men don't advertise.
That's right. So, but yeah, your point's well taken. Look, here's the thing.
So here's where I'm going for Todd. It was a setup. Forgive me. Just hold your thought. If that's the case, if all these riots and all this mayhem is created so that corporations can get richer, doesn't that make the president of the United States, who's an outsider politically, even more valuable? I mean, look at just what happened this week, Todd. NBC partnered with a foreign nonprofit to force Google to demonetize Zero Hedge and the Federalist. How does this happen? From the top down, no?
Yeah, I thought we lived in a country that had freedom of speech and freedom of the press. And when you have, as you mentioned, other entities that don't like what certain entities are saying on certain topics.
Foreign entities.
And then you go after the competition. I mean, really? It's kind of scary times right now. Really is to see that go on at that level. So,
Rob, same question to you, but could you add the spin of, or could you comment on the irony of having a foreign entity team up with NBC to lobby Google to demonetize Zero Hedge and the Federalist in a presidential year?
Right. The entire Russia hoax, the entire claim that got it all started was that Trump was trying to get foreign help from a foreign government actor in order to influence an election. That's literally what NBC did. Literally. There was also a case called Cambridge Analytica, which was a British firm that supposedly got information on Facebook and then was using that to help Republicans. And there had to be meetings on Capitol Hill about that because that was using a British, which is a foreign group, in order to influence an election, was the claim. So, yeah, the irony is, again, it's the same that it always is. I mean, you can't get a better example of this hypocrisy than literally the doctors that told us that we can't go to our grandma's funeral or we can't go to our place of work signed a document saying, yes, millions will die of coronavirus if you go to work, but the protest against George Floyd's death, those are worth it because systemic racism is more of a virus than coronavirus. Well, it's the same thing here. You can't go, the foreign entities can't be involved in our election. But of course, we could directly have a member of the press do that. And then
only the approved ones.
Right. And the real irony here, and I'm sure Todd could speak to this, is as bad as all of that is, this was members of the press intentionally censoring other members of the press. That's unbelievable.
Well, it happens right here in Williamsport at our local newspaper.
Right.
When the cousin of the principal at a certain big high school is the cousin of the publisher of the local newspaper and buries the biggest story since the founding of Little League. But I digress.
Well, so let me ask you this. There are 14 unarmed black men that have been shot by the police.
Last year, that was, yeah.
Right. I don't know how many of those police officers were black, but I believe 10 of those cases have been adjudicated and found to have been good shootings. The other two were
Wait
found...
a minute. Wait. Before you go any further, good shootings or justifiable use of force?
Justifiable. There's two of them that were unjustifiable, and there's two that have not, that are still being investigated, as my understanding. When did those shootings, how did those shootings not provoke what happened in Minneapolis? Well, the answer to that question, Mr. Todd Bartley, is that we saw video of it. What do we do with the constant on of media and video, which I agree with. I agree with having body cams and car cams and whatever else needs to be done. But let's not make any concessions to the fact that the reason why this particular case in Minneapolis went viral was because of the video, but the interpretation of that video is what made it go global. Isn't that right, Todd? The media's interpretation of it.
Yes, and that video is abhorrent. And what's really, really sad is that nobody in that scenario decided to step in and put Mr. Floyd in a police vehicle, as opposed to letting somebody put a knee in the back of somebody's neck.
Right. And now we're hearing that the actual Minneapolis policy was that when you are apprehending someone with what those police officers thought he was afflicted by, which was like a supernatural strength from drugs, and he had cocaine and he had meth in his system, the policy was exactly what this officer did. Did you hear that, Rob?
Yeah, I read the policy and I still don't agree with that because it claims that you can apply.
You don't agree with the policy? You don't agree with the fact that the cops thought that was the policy?
Yeah, the latter. Because if you read the policy, it says that temporary light to moderate force may be placed on the head or neck area. I don't think that justifies 8 minutes and 26 seconds.
No, I agree with it. It's a question.
But yeah, there are questions of, if you want to get into the technical aspects, okay, well, it's not just chokeholds. They're called suppression holds. If we can't use suppression holds anymore, okay, then what do you do with a criminal that's fighting back? Do you hit them with your baton? Well, no, that's violence. Okay, then what's the alternative? Can you use your taser? Nope. We just saw 2 weeks ago a cop getting charged because they said a taser could be a lethal weapon. So then what do? You use your firearm? Well, no, that's clearly not the answer. So the answer they're looking for is they've set the condition up to say there is no policing. Right? And that's what we have to understand. They've already won the battle, by the way. It doesn't matter if they actually defund the police, because once every cop I know is now seeking early retirement. No one my age or younger is ever going to want to be a police officer again, which means that the people you get will be worse, because when you pay garbage wages, you get garbage people. Sorry, but that's true. And so we'll see worse policing, and that's exactly what they wanted, which will give them more justification to say, see, the police are worthless. which allows them to achieve their end goal of destroying the United States of America. That's what these people want. They want to replace it with a Marxist fascist system of globalism that's basically a neo-feudalism. So this is exactly what these people want. And look, let's not kid ourselves. We could talk for 8-10 hours about the situation of George Floyd, what we could do to make policing better. That's not what this is about. Right. It's not remotely about that.
Right.
Like, let me ask you, Todd, this is something we talked about last night. The press used to be considered a prestigious institution. We're correct when we talk about how the press is the fourth estate and we need it to hold truth to power so that the people could understand what's going on in their government. The Associated Press, one of the largest press organizations, just released a statement yesterday that said, from now on, they will be capitalizing the word black to refer to black people because it's such a prestigious grouping. Now, white people will still be lowercase, but black will be uppercase. What do you think about a news organization that's politicizing things that much? Can we trust them to be objective journalists?
I so wish Dr. King was still with us, because we are so far removed from the conversation, right, about what the civil rights movement was all about. It's just abhorrent to me. Why in the world would you do that? It's a political statement in and of itself. You're trying to drive the narrative, and now everybody's going to, follow lockstep in capital B for black and lowercase for white. It's just, you're not helping the cause at all. And it goes right back to what Governor Wolf said to my question. I asked him a question related to unity in regard to race relations, and he gave me an answer of there are two Pennsylvanias. One if you're black and one if you're not. If you're interested in bringing us together, that's not the response.
That was the response when you asked him about unity. It's a lie. It's not a lie. It's a damn lie. Todd, tell me exactly, and you have kids that are involved in Odyssey of the Mind. So explain to me, how is STEM racist?
It's not. Odyssey of the Mind's not racist either.
That's not what they tell us.
It's ridiculous. The kids have been in their career.
There's 5,000 scientists that say that it's racist. Right, Rob?
And by the way, the Williamsport Area School District, Spring Morse teams, I finished, I think, top 3, top 5 in the world again with the virtual worlds that they had this year. Mm-hmm. It's unbelievable.
How is that possible?
Anything but racist. You get to meet kids from all over the country, all over the world. When you go to Worlds, when you go to states, it's amazing.
So it's a lie.
And you make friends for life.
So it's a lie.
You have to understand.
It's not social justice.
No question.
It's not social justice. It's social vengeance. No, Rob?
Right. And understand what, for those of you listening, STEM is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Basically the hard sciences. So if you just give me a second to understand where this is coming from, you have what's called the humanities. These are the non-sciences. So things fall into that. My major was speech communication. It falls into the humanities. But this is where you see your critical black studies, feminism, queer theory. These are all legitimate majors at most major universities now. And they are postmodernists. They don't believe in truth. They are against the values of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment said we need to work to better ourselves. We need to work to gain knowledge. We need to work to treat each other as individuals and compassionately. They literally are against that. They are against it because the Enlightenment came out of Europe. And if it's from Europe, it must be racist. And so they're seeking to tear down science. That's legitimately what they're doing. And understand the reason for this is the postmodernist tradition that they come out of, they don't believe that truth exists. I'll repeat that. They don't believe truth exists. And you could tell when people are using this in politics. Go back to the Kavanaugh hearings. Do you remember Kamala Harris and Cory Booker saying over and over and over again about Christine Blasey Ford? Well, her truth is that she was sexually assaulted by Kavanaugh. Her truth, not the truth, because they don't believe there is a the truth. They believe each of us make up our own truth. And that's why you can't argue facts with these people. Because when you say, well, actually, I know you saw this video of George Floyd, but if we look at the data, actually, it's very rare for police to kill unarmed black men. They don't care. The facts don't matter. They just say there is no such thing as truth. It's just a power struggle. And so they're actively trying to destroy science now. That's literally part of their agenda. And I just want to let me give you a real world example of where this will lead. When you say that knowledge and facts are racist, that's literally what they're saying. There was a situation that occurred with the Bolsheviks in the 1910s and 20s where you had these Bolsheviks in the Soviet Union that would go into these towns, and the farmers in these towns were called kulaks. And the Bolsheviks would go to the townspeople and say, hey, look, why is it that those kulaks own the farm? Now, these kulaks weren't incredibly rich. They just made enough to feed the town and their family. And they said, why are you leaving those people run the farms? That's not their farm. It's the people's farm. And so they killed those kulaks, or they shipped them off to Siberia. As a direct result of that, 15 million Ukrainians starved to death. 15 million. It got so bad that the Soviet Union put signs up that said, remember, no matter how hungry you get, don't eat your children. That's a hellscape that you can't imagine. Now, I want you to think about that, the arrogance that they had that said, let's kick out these farmers because that's knowledge. Farming is knowledge. It's a science. Let's get rid of those farmers because science and knowledge is untrue and it's all just a power game. So we'll take over the farms. Now go look at the Seattle Autonomous Zone. Did you see their farming efforts? These are the people that want to control your life. How did they farm? They threw cardboard down on top of concrete, then put about 3 inches of topsoil and tried to grow crops. These people, by getting rid of science, by getting rid of things like farming, and just assuming that their hippy-dippy love will be able to solve everything, we're going to be crushed as a society. Absolutely crushed. You will starve to death. You will not have access to medicines. You will not have access to engineering. Our infrastructure will crumble. And we do not have Republican leadership that's fighting back against these people. It's utterly despicable.
So, is there any doubt now, Todd, that the real takeaway from the virus was how unprepared the centralized bureaucracy was and how it failed us by not having tests, by not having enough masks, by not having enough ventilators, and no certitude with immediate guidance? Isn't this further evidence that a bigger bureaucratic form of extra curricular constitutional government is a failure? Isn't smaller and simpler equal better?
It was perfectly set up for this country to be told to go back into your homes until we tell you to come back out. It was perfect. And it took extra human effort by the president to overcome that with moving extra ventilators and ramping all of the testing up and doing all that with the private sector. If he and his team hadn't done that, we're still locked in our homes.
Tell us what happened when you asked the governor of the state of Pennsylvania. Well, let me go back. And it's 12:42. So we're after this question, we're going rapid fire. Tell us your thoughts on Governor Wolf, given your access to him and your proximity to him. Tell us, what kind of man do you perceive him to be? And then tell us what happened when you asked him who we should believe amongst the chaos of the messaging from his administration.
Okay, so I truly believe he's a good man at heart, trying to do the right thing, and he believes what he's saying when he's telling everybody he's trying to keep Pennsylvania safe. I truly believe he believes that in his heart of hearts, okay? So then when I asked him when the H.R. 836 came to pass and, they're ending up in court, and I said, Governor, you're saying listen to me. The General Assembly is saying listen to us, and we haven't even heard from the courts yet, which that case was consolidated from Commonwealth Court to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And I believe the 29th is when they're going to have oral arguments at the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. I stand corrected if that date has subsequently changed. So I posed that question directly to him, and he said, Pennsylvanians should listen to me. I'm the governor. I'm endowed with certain powers under the Pennsylvania Constitution, this and that and the other. And it was just very telling. But by filing a lawsuit with the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, you are actually recognizing, and that was going to be one of my questions for yesterday, now that the press conferences at PEMA are a thing of the past, they're going to go back to regular order, if you will, and press conferences either by phone or at some point when they go back to the Capitol, we'll be covering those as well, time and location and availability permitting. for him to say that, and in the lawsuit say, I have these powers and everything else, and go to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, they're acknowledging, the team is acknowledging the General Assembly's rightful place with H.R. 836. By the mere fact you're filing the lawsuit to keep the status quo in place, you're recognizing their power. I don't think that should be lost on anybody. The mere fact he petitioned the Pennsylvania Supreme Court to bypass the Commonwealth Court is very telling. And yesterday, as Rob mentioned too about yesterday, there are a lot.
Tell us why it's telling.
Because on one hand, he's saying that status quo and I'm all powerful, and then HR 36 has no bearing. Well, if it has no bearing, then what are you going to court for? To fight it. You're recognizing their duly elected and codified ability to pass HR 836 and put it into effect. So Commonwealth Court yesterday had a case that they heard, I believe, on Wednesday. Yesterday, the Department of Health pulled this case against the Carlisle Car Show. And I believe one of the judges had said that, well, the governor marched a couple of weeks ago in a protest, and there were hundreds, if not thousands, of people in the protest, just like the car show. And just like that, the Department of Health came to a consent decree with the Carlisle Car Show so they can have it. Interesting how that turned, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Rob, you said something on your show the other day with respect to the governor's duplicity that was just fantastic. You want to just give us your minute and a half roundup on how you feel about the double talk and the confusion and the messaging problems that have come out of the governor's office regarding the COVID-19 virus situation?
Yeah, I mean, so what we see is, again, remember, we were told we have to trust the experts. That was the argument. And the experts included the professionals like Secretary Levine that Governor Wolf had surrounded himself with. So while they were telling us that you can't go back to work, if you do, it'll kill grandma, basically. At the same time, they're then having the disastrous policy of forcing COVID patients into nursing homes, which is causing mass deaths in these nursing homes. And simultaneously, Tom Wolf decides he'll violate his own executive decree by marching with Black Lives Matter protesters. Then he basically gets called out on it by Todd, where Todd's like, well, what do you say about this? And Governor Wolf's like, yeah, you're right. That was hypocritical. The truth is, and I've talked to you about this, Todd, he didn't expect a member of the press to ask that question. And this is the truth of a lot that Tucker Carlson said in his show last night. How is it that these groups have been able to get such power so fast? The reason is there's no pushback. The people in positions of leadership aren't pushing back. So when someone like Todd, who's a legitimate journalist, and correct me if I'm wrong, Todd, you didn't go in there saying, oh, I'm partisan, I'm just going to scream at Tom Wolf for the sake of it. You asked a legitimate question. And they were shocked. They were shocked that a member of the press would say, you told us all that it was your executive order that we couldn't be in these groups of more than so many. Yet you were in one of those groups. And he didn't know how to respond.
Over several weeks, I believe I asked Secretary Levine, the day he did it was, I believe, a Wednesday. Either that Friday or the following Monday, dates are all running together now. I asked the governor, right? You marched, he said what he said. After Secretary Levine said what she said. And then Wednesday, they over-messaged wearing masks in the press conference to make sure everybody understood it's required to go into a business and you must wear a mask. And if you're going to go outside and interact, you have to have a mask. Then they put out 2 press releases yesterday, one from the governor early in the day and one from the Secretary of Health later in the day. Wear a mask, wear a mask, wear a mask. I mean, you talk about living rent-free in people's heads with one very simple question about you're telling us all to live a certain way and you're doing the direct opposite.
And that's the real, and I'll just finish up real quick with this. Everyone listening here, never trust anything that the experts say again, unless you could verify it yourself. I mean that truthfully. We see the experts in politics, such as Governor Wolf and governors around the country, that told you, oh, you have to stay in. It's terrible if you're going out, such as Whitmer, such as Cuomo, these governors. Yet they're out there breaking their own executive orders. We saw the health experts, supposedly, that we had to listen to, tell us, oh, it's okay to go out and riot and protest for Black Lives Matter. the virus isn't a big deal then. But if you wanted to go to your grandmother's funeral, if you wanted to go to your daughter's wedding, if you wanted to go to work so you could feed your family, you can't do any of that. It is clear, as I said from the get-go, that the response to COVID was one to gain political power. They want to destroy the working class in this country. That is what the response was. And the fact that they flipped on a dime. It's not like they said, well, okay, these protests for George Floyd are probably going to spread the virus and that's really bad, but there's nothing we could do to stop it. They actively cheered it on. The health experts, the scientists said, yes, it's good to be out there and doing this. So just remember, next year when they talk to you about the bird flu that's coming or climate change, or they tell you you need to give up your rights for whatever the cause is, they're lying to you. They are lying because they want to crush you and they want more power for themselves.
Consider this. The CDC has spent hundreds of millions of dollars for failed prevention efforts, but enough money for international junkets and lavish offices without demonstrating it has ever controlled any disease ever. Their mission creep has included reports on documenting multi-million-dollar CDC studies on topics like prevention of gun violence, how parents should discipline their children, the chronic health conditions amongst lesbian, gay, and bisexual populations, a leftist's paradise on our dime. Still think Dr. Fauci cares about you? Still happy about his messaging all along that said, we experts have to worry, not the public. You don't need to worry. But what he didn't tell us was that the public should be prepared to bear the costs of this disruption with blood and life. You know, in recent budgets, the WHO, the World Health Organization, which is an offshoot of the United Nations, spent 2 times more on travel than they did on medical supplies. Not to mention that it parroted the lies of the communist Chinese government during the crisis as if it were, a wholly owned subsidiary. We should, of course, listen to the experts because we are united by the principle that we are all created equal, right? Expertise alone cannot, as a simple fact of principle, tell us finally what is right to do, like many governors have said. You addressed us chiefly as carriers of a plague to be kept indefinitely in our homes. Let that sink in. We can't be trusted because we are the plague. Unbelievably, there was no pushback, no capable pushback by our leaders, our local leaders. And more to the point, a lot of mental gymnastics to find an equal ground with such autocracy. Yes, we were the virus. Talk about a narrow point of view. Still think they should be deciding our fate? They are our public servants, not our masters, Governor Wolf. All the while restricting treatments for the virus that showed promise. These treatments need to go through vigorous testing for years, they lectured. We were accused of wanting to kill our grandmothers because we dared say that at some point the cost of devastating our economy will become worse than the virus. The grandmothers, they themselves condemned to death by their nursing home policies. Then the shutdown policies themselves were not only blunt, but sweeping. Like, why were factories shut down? Why were landscapers not allowed to work? Laundromats, especially in the initial phase when those vendors that worked with nursing homes couldn't launder. Was that a critical misstep? Nothing shows the lack of seriousness by our leaders in Congress as much as the lack lacking a complete picture and understanding of the 40 million people that lost their jobs, including a $25 million stipend to the Kennedy Arts Center, 75 million for National Endowment of the Arts, 25 million to the House of Representatives themselves for, quote, salaries and expenses. You have to ask yourself, for what possible reason? You know why? For plunder. For plunder. The safety net was supposed to be for the people that lost their jobs because the direct actions of politicians, not to fund the representation of one person sodomizing another as a form of artistic expression. Sorry, don't believe me? Okay, you decide. You decide. Rob?
Yeah, it's every institution, too. I mean, look at it this way. So we had to trust the World Health Organization. The Wuhan lab that this came out of was a World Health Organization lab. They spent the first early months of this virus telling us the important thing is not to mention it came from China. The important thing is to not be racist towards China. Make sure you believe what China's saying. The CDC told us masks work. Masks didn't work. Masks worked again. They made all of these declarations about how we need to stop children from going to school when it's shown that actually the science shows that there was never any evidence that this was lethal for children. In fact, it's less lethal than the common flu. But then branch out from there. Look at what we see from our institutions like the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is writing law. They're legislating from the bench. Look at what we see from somewhere like the UN. The UN put out a statement yesterday saying it was really bad for the United States to consider Antifa possibly a domestic terrorist organization because that stymies free speech. So the UN criticizing the United States, defending Antifa. Every single one of these institutions, both domestically and around the world, every single one of them is totally controlled by the kind of globalist narrative that we see being pushed. And they argue continuously that that's not the case. Not only is it not the case, they say it's the inverse. Oh, if you listen to them, right-wing autocrats are controlling the world. It's just not true. And we need to stop listening to these people unquestioningly like they're experts. I mean, they're shameless. They're saying today that Trump shouldn't be allowed to have his rally while they're encouraging rallies in Brooklyn today for Black Lives Matter.
Trump's having a protest, Robert.
Right. I mean, they don't care about you. They don't care. It's clear that this was a power grab. And let me tell you something. Like Scott Adams talks about this a lot. Are you just finding this out? Do you think that it's changed? Do you think that these agencies used to care about you 2 years ago, but now it's changed? No. It's just that now people are waking up to they've always been this corrupt. At least for decades, they've been this corrupt. And it's been a consistent... Again, I'll just real quick, I'll finish on this point. This is what I'm telling my friends that are on the left that are concerned about the black community. That's fine. You should be concerned. There's a lot of bad things that are happening in that community that we as a nation should try to fix. You are allying yourself with the very people that have set the conditions to make things so bad in that community and in the rest of America. These establishment people want us at each other's throat based on race so that we're not looking at the man behind the curtain. And that's all of these groups in the establishment that have robbed working Americans and poor Americans for decades and continue to do so, laughing all the way, saying, all we got to do to continue to plunder all of these populations is hang a sign up that says Black Lives Matter, and no one questions us.
Todd, final thoughts.
Just real quick to look ahead at this week and the following week. There's a lot of movement on the Myrtle Beach case, so stay tuned. Part 18 should be released either tonight or tomorrow. And
30 seconds on what the Myrtle Beach case is, please.
So the Williamsport Area School District baseball team took a trip to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina 2 years ago, 2018, and a teammate indecently assaulted another teammate. It's been referred to the state attorney general here in Pennsylvania, and there's a lot of moving parts to it. So stay tuned to foxsportswilliamsport.com for part 18 and 19.
The most important part of that is that the Williamsport Area School District denies it flatly.
Yeah, they ran an investigation on themselves. Brandon Pardo is the high school principal that was on the trip, ran an investigation. And if you go to part, I believe it's either 13 or 14, he has a conversation with a detective in Myrtle Beach and never says that he ran an investigation. So yes. It's very interesting reading. It's very interesting listening. So stay tuned.
Picturesquely underscored by the fact that the Myrtle Beach Police Department has a 6-minute audio clip of the same principal misleading them for 6 minutes. So thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate it. In closing, we have a couple of choices. There's things we can do. There's teaching, there's learning, there's knowledge, there's action, and there's force. For the people that are interested, that are protesting because they want justice, the authentic people that are doing that, teaching, learning, knowledge, and action is what's required. I will be the very first one online to be able to participate in that conversation. The very first, not the second, the first. For all those other people, the rioters and the looters and the mayhem and the anarchists and the arsonists, there is only one thing for you. Force. Lethal, if necessary. End of conversation, period, the end. Are you surprised that there is not one single Democratic governor that has expressed real frustration at not being able to end the economic shutdowns? Plenty of frustration towards those that ask particular questions, like Todd Bartley, regarding threshold and stable and consistent guidelines, though, right? We better start getting politically active. You better start getting involved. We better find a way to learn how to get past this. Maybe we can start by understanding that all those problems were caused in democratic cities by democratic politicians and democratic policies, and control these police departments like cities in Minneapolis and Chicago and Detroit and St. Louis and Baltimore and Seattle. Think about that before you get money to the military and the marketing arm of the Democratic Party. You know, Black Lives Matter. The primordial question is the following, picturesquely expressed by President Trump in his Warsaw speech. The fundamental question in our time is whether the West has the will to survive. Do we have the confidence in our values to defend them? Do we have the desire and the courage to preserve our civilization in the face of those who would subvert and destroy it? Do we? You decide. We'll see you next week.